"Please let me die," she whispered, but a native warrior held her tight and saved her. The river ran colder than any spring water had a right to be. Melted snow rushed down from distant peaks, turning the current sharp and restless, the kind of current that tugged at ankles as if asking for secrets. Along the banks, willow branches leaned out over the water, whispering and swaying like they knew what was coming before it happened. Mara stood at the edge, barefoot on the wet stones, her dress torn nearly to ribbons, clinging to her skin like a memory she didn't want. Mud streaked her legs. Soot darkened her arms. Her breath came in broken shivers. It wasn't just the cold. Something deeper trembled through her, something that had hollowed her out night after night until she barely recognized herself. She'd run for 2 nights straight, over razor-sharp ridge paths, through thickets that tore at her skin, across ground meant for deer and shadows, not human feet. Behind her, a place she refused to name still burned in her mind. The shouting, the rough hands, the fire she hadn't waited to see die out. For the first time in weeks, she'd outrun the voices, but she couldn't outrun the feeling. The river's pull whispered in her ears. Let go, let it end, let it stop hurting. She stepped in. Water swallowed her calves, then her knees. The ache was immediate, like knives of ice slipping into her bones. She didn't flinch, she took another step. "Please," she whispered to no one. "I'm tired, I'm so tired." A soft crunch in the brush behind her made her freeze. She turned her head sharply, expecting danger, expecting the past to have caught up at last. Instead, she found a man standing a few paces away beneath a leaning pine. Tall, shoulders straight, skin warm and dark like sunlit earth. His hair was tied back, strands lifting with the breeze. He carried no gun, no raised weapon, only a satchel and a few sprigs of dried herbs in his hand. He didn't move, didn't threaten, didn't even blink. "Don't come closer," she gasped. He didn't. Instead, in a calm, low voice, he said, "If you want to die, that's your choice, but don't do it where I must watch." Something inside her broke, because there was no judgment in his tone, no disbelief, no sharp edge, just quiet truth spoken like a man who understood silence better than most. "Why not?" she choked. He looked at the river, then at her. "Because I've carried enough ghosts. I won't carry yours unless you force it on me." She shook. The current lapped at her thighs. For the first time in days, she felt seen, not as a broken thing or a hunted thing, but as a person standing on the edge of a decision. "I'm not afraid," she lied. He stepped forward, slow as morning light. "Then die warm," he said gently. "Not like this." He held out a blanket, and somehow she let him lead her back to shore, her legs buckling the moment the water released her. He caught her before she fell, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. "Come," he murmured. "The storm hasn't even begun yet." And that was how Mara met the man who refused to let the river take her. The man carried Mara through the trees with a steadiness she didn't understand. She expected questions. She expected suspicion. She expected him to recoil from her bruises, her smell of smoke and fear. But he didn't. He simply held her as if she were something fragile but worth saving. His cabin appeared where the forest thickened, tucked against a sandstone rise, half hidden by juniper and pine. It wasn't large, no more than a single room with a small porch and a crooked chimney. But to Mara, trembling in his arms, it might as well have been a fortress. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant with wood smoke and crushed sage. A stone hearth crackled in the corner, sending soft light flickering across shelves filled with herbs, wooden carvings, and tools polished by long use. Everything looked touched by patience. He lowered her gently onto a cot near the fire. The blanket around her shoulders still held his warmth. "Stay still," he said softly, moving to the fireplace. "Cold can linger in the bones if you let it." He stoked the flames, adding kindling until they glowed brighter. Mara watched him, too exhausted to speak, too alert to sleep. The river's pull still echoed in her chest. After a moment he spoke again without looking up. "I'm Aryan." Something about the name fit him, simple, quiet, steady. Her voice scraped like sand against stone. "Mara." He nodded once as if he'd known all along. He set a pot of water over the fire, then rummaged in a small crate until he found bundles of dried herbs tied with thin twine. When he pulled off a strip and crumbled the leaves between his fingers, the air filled with something warm and bittersweet. "It will help you breathe easier," he said. "You've inhaled too much smoke." She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength for anything except existing. Aryan fetched a basin, filled it with warm water, and knelt beside her feet. "May I?" he asked. The fact that he asked made her chest tight. She nodded. He unwrapped the blanket just enough to reveal her battered feet. Cuts, bruises, crusted dirt, each mark a mile of pain she'd forced herself through. He didn't flinch. He cleaned each wound with water and herbs, slow and careful. "You walked far," he murmured. "Had to." He didn't press. Didn't ask what she was running from or who had hurt her. Instead, he wrapped her feet in soft cloth and tucked the blanket back around her as though returning warmth to a place it had forgotten. "You're safe here," he said simply. "Safe." The word struck her harder than the cold river had. He handed her a cup of steeped tea. She held it with both hands, letting the steam thaw her fingers. Silence settled between them, not empty, but calm. Mara listened to the fire's low crackle, the soft grind of Arian's blade as he began carving a small piece of cedar. He didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look at her like she was a burden. He looked at her like she was alive. Hours later, her voice finally cracked through the quiet. "I wasn't going to jump," she whispered. "I was thinking." Arian didn't look up from his carving. "Thinking," he said, "can be the heaviest place to drown." Mara's throat tightened. For the first time in days, tears rose quiet, trembling, not demanded by fear but released by safety. In Arian's small cabin, warmed by firelight and silence, she let herself weep. And he let her, steady as stone beside a river that had nearly claimed her. Morning came gently, as though it feared waking her too abruptly. Pale gold light seeped through the single window, laying itself across the wooden floor like a soft blanket. Mara stirred beneath the wool covers, her limbs heavy but warm, truly warm for the first time in weeks. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. Her body had simply surrendered when exhaustion outweighed fear. Arian was already awake. She heard him before she saw him, the faint scrape of stone against wood, the steady rhythm of a man accustomed to quiet mornings. When she peeked from beneath her arm, she found him seated at the low table, grinding something in a small mortar. "You slept," he said without turning. "A little," she whispered. "That's more than you've had," he replied, as though stating a fact about the weather. He sprinkled the powdered herbs into a tin pot that sat over the coals. A sharp, soothing scent drifted through the room, pine, eucalyptus, something else she couldn't name. Mara sat up and winced. Pain flared through her legs, her ribs, her feet. Arian noticed the way she stiffened. He rose without hurry, filled a basin with warm water and knelt again beside the cot. "Let me see your feet." Mara hesitated. Too many hands had touched her without permission. Too many nights had taught her to flinch first, question later. "You don't have to let me," Arian said quietly. "But I want to help, not hurt." The gentleness in his voice loosened something in her chest. She nodded. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing her swollen, cut skin. He didn't draw back, didn't sigh or shake his head. Instead, he dipped a cloth into the warm water and began to clean each wound again, slow and careful as sunrise. "You ever walk barefoot on stone for miles?" he asked, voice soft. "No. Hurts like hell," he said with a faint smile. A tiny huff of laughter escaped her, startled, fragile but real. "You're from this place?" she asked. He shrugged. "Used to be. Life changes shape sometimes." She didn't press. She wasn't ready to share her own shape yet. When he finished tending her feet, he wrapped them with clean linen and handed her a cup of the steaming brew. Mara cupped it between her palms, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. They sat in quiet again, but this quiet felt different, lighter, less suffocating. "I thought about the river for days," she said suddenly. "Not just last night, it's like it was the only door I could find." Arian set down his carving and met her gaze. "When everything feels like a trap, the smallest crack can look like an escape." She swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am anymore." He leaned back on his heels, studying her with eyes that didn't judge. "You're alive, you're exhausted, and you're free of whoever tried to claim you." She flinched at that, but he didn't apologize for the truth. "And," he added softly, "you're someone who walked miles on broken feet. That tells me you're stronger than you feel." Mara looked away, blinking against the tightness in her eyes. She didn't feel strong. She felt scraped down to bone. Arian returned to his seat and picked up a piece of cedar. His knife moved slowly, shaving delicate curls of wood that fell like feathers to the floor. "Rest," he murmured. "Let your body remember safety before you decide anything else." Mara nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. For the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to believe that rest was not a weakness. And in the small wooden cabin with the scent of herbs drifting through the air, she began, quietly, timidly, to breathe again. The days that followed slipped by like gentle water, slow, steady, soft around the edges. Mara slept more than she spoke, her body finally allowed to stop running. Each morning brought a little more warmth in her face, a little less tremble in her hands. Arian never hurried her. He moved around the cabin with quiet purpose, stirring pots, grinding herbs, carving wood, making the space feel lived in, not looming. Mara found comfort in those small sounds, in the way they reminded her the world hadn't ended even if hers had cracked open. On the third morning she stood by the window for the first time, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Outside, sunlight spilled across the clearing like honey. A pair of finches hopped along a fallen log. The sight made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "I used to like mornings," she murmured. Arian, who was tying bundles of sage with thin twine, glanced over. "You still can." Liking things again doesn't betray what you've been through. Mara didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed him. Later, he stepped outside to mend the fence near the goat pen. Mara watched him through the open doorway, wood chips catching the sun as he worked. His movements were sure, as though his muscles remembered a rhythm his mouth didn't bother explaining. At some point, she found herself stepping outside, barefoot but careful. The air touched her skin like a blessing she hadn't earned. Arian looked up briefly, gave her a nod, just a nod, not a question, and returned to hammering a loose post back into the soil. Mara stood there for a long moment, letting the wind touch her hair. The silence outside was different from the silence she'd known in captivity. This one wasn't a threat. It didn't hide footsteps. It didn't smother her breath. It just existed, and let her exist too. When she returned inside, something tugged at her, something small, a flicker of an old instinct. She began sweeping the cabin floor with the old bristle broom leaning near the hearth. Dust gathered in soft piles. It felt good to move on purpose, not in panic. Arian returned as she finished and raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to do chores." "I know," she set the broom aside. "I just wanted to." He nodded, and something almost like pride warmed his expression. "Then it's good." That afternoon, Mara found an old leather-bound journal on a high shelf, half blank and half filled with neat, looping handwriting she couldn't read. She hesitated, then opened to an empty page. Her fingers shook as she held the stolen pencil stub. "What are you writing?" Arian asked quietly from the doorway. "I don't know yet." She drew a breath that shuddered on the way in. "Maybe a piece of myself." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Words can carry what your voice can't." She lowered her head and let the pencil touch the page. "Dear Mama." The words trembled out of her, not steady but real. Tears stung, but she blinked them away and kept writing, memories of home, of warm bread, of summer evenings before her life had broken open. When she finished the letter, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her blanket. She didn't dare send it. She wasn't ready. But the act of writing it felt like placing a seed in the soil. Later, as she and Arian shared a quiet evening meal, he glanced at her with a softness that felt like sunlight on a shuttered room. "You're finding your way back," he said. Mara stared into her bowl, heart trembling. "I'm trying." And for the first time since she reached the riverbank, she believed that trying was enough. By the fifth night, Mara's body had stopped shaking every time she heard footsteps. She could walk short distances without wincing too deeply, and she no longer startled when Arian reached for something near her. But sleep still refused to hold her. Long after the fire settled into glowing embers, she lay awake on the cot, staring at the beams overhead. Shadows moved like memories, familiar in shape, dangerous in meaning. Every time her eyes drifted closed, she felt hands pulling her back into nightmares she wasn't ready to name. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the pines like distant voices. Mara pulled the blanket tighter, counting her breaths, 4 in, 6 out. Arian had taught her that the day before. "Let your breath be heavier than your fear," he'd said. Tonight it wasn't working. A soft flicker of light broke the stillness. Arian had lit a single candle at the table. He didn't speak at first. He just sat there, carving a small bird from a block of cedar, his hands moving slow and sure. "You don't sleep much," Mara whispered. He didn't look up. "I sleep when my mind lets me. Same as you, I'm guessing." Her throat tight. I hear things." "Memories?" he asked gently. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Arian set down his knife and brushed the wood shavings off his palms. Come sit by the fire. Sometimes sitting upright helps. Mara hesitated, then rose from the cot, blanket trailing behind her. She took a seat near him, close enough to feel the warmth but still with space to retreat if her chest tightened. Arian didn't crowd her. He simply adjusted the candle so she could see better. The carved bird lay on the table between them. Its wings were still rough, but its shape was emerging, a promise of flight. "What does it feel like?" he asked quietly. "The thing that keeps you awake." Mara swallowed hard. No one had ever asked that, not without demanding details, not without turning her pain into spectacle, but Arian's voice held nothing but patience. He left the space between his question and her answer wide enough for safety. "It feels like," her voice cracked. She tried again. "It feels like I'm still trapped there, even though I know I'm not." Arian nodded once. "The body remembers what the mind wants to forget." Her breath hitched. She curled the blanket tighter around herself. "They kept telling me I was weak, that I couldn't survive without them, and when I ran, I didn't know if I was running for my life or just running because I had nothing left to lose." Arian didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply let her speak, like someone who knew how heavy silence could get when held alone. Mara's eyes blurred. "I didn't want to die at the river," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to keep living." Arian's expression softened. "You came here," he said softly, "on broken feet with a broken heart. That isn't weakness, Mara, that's defiance." Her breath trembled out of her, unsteady and wet. "I'm tired of being afraid." "Then let the fear sit beside you," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Not inside you, not on top of you, beside you. Fear isn't something to outrun, not always. Sometimes it just needs a seat at the table." Mara stared into the fire. The flames shifted, orange and gold, flickering like wings. "Does it ever go away?" she asked. Arian shook his head. "Not fully, but it gets quieter when you're not carrying it alone." A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Arian didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. And for the first time, Mara let the fear sit beside her without letting it swallow her whole. The morning after Mara finally spoke her truth, the world outside felt different, lighter, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath and could now exhale with her. She stepped outside with the blanket around her shoulders, letting the early light wash over her face. Arian stood by the small goat pen, feeding the animals dried stalks of grain. He looked up when he sensed her presence, not surprised, not startled, just aware in that quiet way he always was. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," Mara replied, though the exhaustion didn't feel as sharp today. Arian brushed his hands against his trousers. "Come, let's walk a little." Mara hesitated. The woods were beautiful, but they still felt unpredictable, too open, too full of places where sound could echo wrong. But Arian didn't push. He simply turned and waited. Something about the way he stood, steady, patient, gave her enough courage to try. She followed him along a narrow path behind the cabin. The trees rose tall overhead, branches weaving together like a cathedral ceiling. Sunlight filtered through in soft shafts that made the dusk glow like floating gold. Arian walked slowly to match her pace. The earth beneath her still tender feet felt forgiving, covered in pine needles, cool and quiet. "Why did you build your cabin all the way out here?" Mara asked. Arian smiled faintly. "I didn't build it, my grandfather did. It was his refuge, then my father's, then mine." Mara looked at him, curious for the first time. "Refuge from what?" He paused, considering. "From noise, from people who think healing comes on their timeline." His gaze softened. "From memories that talk too loud." Mara's step slowed. "You've lost someone," Arian nodded once. "My wife 4 years ago." She felt her breath catch, not because he'd said something painful, but because he'd said it so honestly, without flinching. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to be. Grief is love that doesn't know where to go anymore." His voice was steady, but his eyes held shadows she recognized. "I learned to make space for it. The woods helped." Mara looked around at the towering pines. "You think they can help me too?" Arian gave a small shrug. "They'll listen. When I didn't want to speak, they listened for me." They reached a fallen tree covered in moss. Arian sat, brushing pine needles aside. Mara hesitated but joined him, letting the quiet wrap around them. A long moment they simply breathed in sync with the forest, slow, calm, alive. Arian reached into his pocket and placed the tiny carved bird on the log between them. Its wings were still half-shaped, but its body was smooth, nearly finished. "I made this for you," he said. Mara's breath faltered. "Why?" "Because you remind me of it, not quite ready to fly, but definitely not broken." Her eyes blurred instantly. She touched the bird with trembling fingertips. The cedar was warm from his pocket. "I don't know if I can be that," she whispered. "You already are, you just don't see it yet." A small sob escaped her, quiet but honest. She covered her mouth, but Arian didn't look away. "Out here," he said softly, "you can break and rebuild as many times as you need. No one is keeping count." Mara closed her eyes as the tears came, grief, relief, and something else she hadn't felt since before the world went dark, hope. It flickered in her chest like the first flame beneath kindling. Not ablaze yet, but enough. The days began to form a rhythm, gentle as the sway of branches in the late summer wind. Mara woke early now, not from panic, but because her body had begun trusting the mornings again. She helped Arian gather herbs, carried water from the creek, and sometimes sat outside with the little cedar bird in her hands, feeling its grain under her fingertips. Healing wasn't a straight path. Some days she walked easily. Other days her knees shook just from stepping outside. Arian never measured her progress. He only walked beside her, no matter the pace. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft lavender, Mara sat at the table staring at the journal she had taken from the shelf. The folded letter to her mother lay between the pages like a pressed flower, beautiful, fragile, waiting. Arian was sharpening his knife by the fire. He didn't ask why she kept staring at the paper. He simply waited for her to speak first. Finally, Mara whispered, "I think I want to send it." Arian set the knife down, his eyes lifting gently. "The letter," she nodded, fingers trembling. "I don't know what she'll think. I don't even know if she remembers me the way I was, but I want her to know I'm still here. I didn't want to break her heart by disappearing forever." Arian's expression softened with something like quiet pride. "Then let her know. She deserves that, and so do you." Mara unfolded the letter, smoothing its creases. Her handwriting looked like someone else's, shaky, uncertain, but trying. She read the words again. "Mom, I survived. I'm not ready to come home yet, but I'm safe. Please don't think I forgot you. I'm healing slowly. I hope you can forgive the time I lost." Her vision blurred. She blinked until the page cleared. Arian stood slowly and reached for his coat. "There's a postal station in the small valley down the ridge. I can take it in the morning." Mara held the letter close. "Can I give it to you then?" "I'm not ready to let go of it just yet." "Of course." He returned to his seat and the cabin settled into warm silence again. Mara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the journal, her heart pounding but steady. For the first time since escaping, she felt as though she had stepped slightly, tentatively, back toward the world she had once belonged to. Later that night, sleep came slowly. Mara lay awake listening to the wind brushing the cabin walls. But this time, the sound didn't echo with fear. It sounded almost like encouragement. At some point she rose, drawn to the open doorway. The sky outside was a tapestry of stars, more than she had ever seen in one night. They flickered like distant lanterns calling her forward. Arian joined her in the doorway, quiet as always. He didn't ask why she was awake. "The stars look closer here," she murmured. "They're the same distance," he said, leaning against the frame. "You're just standing in a place where you can finally see them." Her breath caught, not from sorrow but from the truth of it. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was beginning to look up instead of down, beginning to feel the weight in her chest shift into something livable, something hopeful. Mara looked down at the cedar bird she held in her hand. "You think it'll ever fly?" she asked softly. Arian smiled, a rare warm curve of his lips. "It already has." She didn't understand fully, not yet, but she felt the meaning settle like warmth inside her. And that night, beneath a sky full of stars, Mara realized she had taken her first step forward without fear chasing her from behind. Morning arrived wrapped in soft mist. Dew clung to the needles of every pine tree around the cabin, turning each branch into a string of tiny diamonds. Mara stepped outside with her journal pressed to her chest. Her letter, rested inside it, warm from being held all night. Arian was preparing his pack near the porch steps. He looked up as she approached. "Ready?" she nodded, though her knees felt unsteady. "I don't know why I'm so scared. It's just a letter." "It's more than that," Arian said gently. "It's the piece of you that wants to live." Mara swallowed the lump in her throat and handed him the journal. He took it carefully as though accepting something sacred and tucked it into his pack. Then he placed his hand lightly on her shoulder just for a heartbeat. "I'll be back by afternoon." She managed a small smile. "I'll try not to burn the cabin down." Arian chuckled softly and headed down the narrow path. Mara watched until the trees swallowed him. The forest felt bigger without his presence, quieter but not empty, not anymore. She spent the morning gathering firewood and cleaning the hearth. She hummed softly to herself, a tune she didn't remember learning but somehow knew by heart. As she swept the porch, the cedar bird sat on the railing, watching the world with its half-carved wings. The sun began to rise higher, then higher. Arian would return soon. Mara sat on the steps, letting the warmth soak into her skin. But as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. Memories surfaced, not to haunt her but to release her. She remembered her mother braiding her hair before school. She remembered the smell of cinnamon on winter mornings. She remembered laughter, her own, echoing through a kitchen she'd once called home. And for the first time since escaping, the memories didn't feel like knives. They felt like anchors, like roots, like parts of her that hadn't died after all. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from pain but from relief. She whispered to the wind, "I'm still me, I'm still here." As if answering, a breeze swept through the clearing, lifting the cedar bird slightly. Mara laughed softly, surprised by the sound. She touched the carving, feeling its smooth curves, and realized it no longer felt like a symbol of what she needed. It felt like a symbol of who she was becoming. By midday, Arian returned. Mara stood when she saw him, heart pounding not from fear but something warmer. He approached and handed back her journal. "It's sent," he said. "Your mother will know you're alive." Her breath caught. She pressed the journal to her chest. "Thank you." Arian's eyes held a softness that made heat crawl into her cheeks. "You did the hard part, Mara." She hesitated, then asked, "Can I tell you something? Anything? I thought I'd lost everything, but being here, being alive, writing that letter, maybe it means I still have something left, something worth fighting for." Arian's voice grew quiet. "You do, more than you realize." Mara felt her heart tremble, not with fear but with a fragile, growing light. The weight she'd carried for so long wasn't gone, but she felt strong enough for the first time to put some of it down, not because she was healed, but because she no longer believed she had to heal alone. The forest had changed, though Mara hadn't noticed at first. Perhaps it was just the light, golden, soft, as if every leaf had been dipped in sunlight. Or perhaps it was her own eyes that were changing, seeing the world not as a trap but as a canvas. She woke that morning with a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not fragile, brittle hope, but steady, quiet hope. The kind that hums in your chest and makes your heartbeat feel like a drumline, steady and alive. Arian was already outside, his boots crunching softly against the forest floor. He was moving the carved cedar birds to a sunlit clearing, arranging them as if preparing for some small ceremony. Mara followed, her journal in hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. He glanced at her, eyes bright. "Showing you something, not just something, showing you how far you've come." She tilted her head, curious, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Arian handed her a bird, smooth and finely carved. "Your first one," he said. "Remember how hesitant you were to even pick up a knife?" She laughed softly, the sound almost foreign. She traced the curves with her fingers. "It's beautiful, but I didn't do it alone." He shook his head gently. "No, but you did the hard part. You started. That's what matters." They spent the morning together, arranging the birds in patterns across the clearing. Some perched on branches, some on rocks. Others lined the small stream that cut through the forest like a silver ribbon. Each bird seemed to carry a story, a memory, a piece of Mara's journey. By noon, Mara felt a sense of peace she thought she'd lost forever. She looked at Arian and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Gratitude and something more, something tender that stirred in the hollow spaces of her heart. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she whispered. Arian met her gaze, his expression soft. "You deserve it, you deserve to feel alive." The wind rustled through the trees, lifting her hair and carrying away some of the shadows she had carried for so long. For the first time, Mara believed it, believed in life, in joy, in herself. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Mara felt the urge to speak her truth. "Arian, thank you. For everything. for the letters, for staying, for believing I could be more than my fears. He stepped closer, taking her hand in his. You don't need to thank me. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I see you. Her heart thumped in her chest. I see me, she asked softly. Yes, he said, his voice unwavering. And you're worth seeing, worth living for, worth loving. Mara's breath caught. For a moment she wanted to run, to hide from the depth of feeling rising inside her, but she stayed because this time she trusted herself to receive it. And as the first stars began to peek out in the velvet sky, Mara realized she had finally arrived at a place she hadn't dared to imagine. A place where wounds didn't define her, where love didn't demand perfection, where life was not a battle to survive but a gift to cherish. She leaned her head against Arian's shoulder, letting the weight of fear and sorrow slide off her like water off stone. Around them, the cedar birds seemed to glow in the twilight, as if celebrating her courage, her transformation, and the life she had chosen. And finally Mara smiled, truly smiled, from a heart that was no longer broken, only healing. The forest didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It was home. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Mara woke to the gentle hum of the forest birdsong threading through the trees like a delicate melody. She stretched, feeling strength in her limbs that had once been heavy with doubt and sorrow. Today was different. Today felt like the beginning of everything she had been dreaming of, without even knowing it was possible. Arian was already awake, tending to the small fire near the clearing. He looked up and smiled as she approached. Good morning, he said, his voice warm, calm, familiar. Good morning, Mara replied, a smile tugging at her lips. But this smile was deeper than joy. It carried peace, acceptance, and hope. She realized she was no longer haunted by the shadows of her past. They were part of her story, yes, but they did not define her. Together, they walked through the forest one last time, tracing the paths Mara had wandered alone months ago. Only now, she walked not with hesitation but with purpose. Every leaf, every rustling branch seemed to celebrate her journey, whispering encouragement as if the forest itself had waited patiently for her return. They reached the heart of the clearing, where the cedar birds rested, shimmering in the soft sunlight. Mara knelt and touched one, feeling the smoothness of the wood beneath her fingertips. I can't believe how far I've come, she whispered. Arian crouched beside her. You did it, Mara. You chose to believe in yourself when no one else could. You let life in, and now life is letting you shine. A gust of wind swirled around them, carrying petals from nearby blossoms. Mara laughed, the sound light and free, like it had been waiting years to be heard. She looked at Arian, and this time words were unnecessary. The bond between them spoke louder than any confession. They had seen each other through fear, pain, and doubt, and now they were ready to step into joy together. I'm ready, Mara said softly. Ready for what comes next. Arian took her hand, holding it gently yet firmly. Then let's go, together. Hand in hand, they walked out of the forest, past the paths Mara had once feared, past the shadows that had tried to hold her back. Every step was lighter, freer, a testament to courage, to resilience, to love. As they reached the edge of the forest, a small village appeared, bathed in golden light. Children played, neighbors greeted each other, and life, simple, vibrant, and full, stretched before them like an open canvas. Mara felt her heart swell, realizing that home wasn't just a place. It was a feeling, a connection, a heart that could love and be loved. Turning to Arian, she said, I was lost, but I've found my way, and I found you. Arian smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I found you too, Mara. That's all I ever needed. They stepped forward together, ready to embrace a future that would not be free of challenges, but one that would be rich with love, laughter, and shared dreams. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the village and the forest beyond, Mara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in her life, she understood. Happiness wasn't something to chase. It was something she had created, step by courageous step, heart by brave heart. And as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, Mara and Arian stood together, smiling, ready to write the rest of their story. One full of hope, love, and the beauty of a life fully lived. The forest had given her strength, and the world now awaited her embrace. She was home.